So really, today we'll be wrapping up and talking about where the money comes from, because this is one of the key areas that you think about when you are doing your research. And so I'll be looking at research funding options and grant preparation. As you've heard in the introduction, I've been involved in research for a while. And actually, for me, it is one of the things that I actively engage in. And so one of the questions that I had here is, where do you start your research journey? And for those of you in the audience at various stages, the research journey, you can replace this with your grants application journey. Because even if you've been doing research for a while or publishing, you may be jumping into the grants funding space for the first time. So in that regard, will be a start. But just to show you where my own research journey started, so this was when we were in medical school. As you can see here, various stages of nutrition in this group. Most of them, actually all of them, are now specialists in various places. But during my year 3, year 4, I was actively involved in, actually it was data collection. So I was part of this study called the Kesho-Bora study that was being done by Prof. Ndwati. And she was a PI on this project. And our job back then was simply to collect data from the files and put them into a repository. And so one of the things that happened for me was, as I did this, I got practice into data entry and data collection, which actually ended up being a very useful skill to have much later on. I just didn't know it at the time. And we spent many hours decoding data, indexing them. And as I was doing this, I was watching how they were doing it. So moving it from paper onto an electronic database. And so to interface to what we are talking about now, the very first thing when you're thinking about funding options or applying for a particular grant is actually, so begin by doing your homework. So say I am thinking about getting research for a project on endoscopy. And so I have an idea in my mind of what I want to do. But now I'm asking, who can fund this project? So begin by actually asking around, who are the prospective funding bodies? And this can be very general. You can ask, are there industry people who are doing this? Are there actual grants that you know that are there? Are there training institutions that are funding this kind of work? So cast your net wide and then find out what is available. Then the second thing about the homework is, so say you identify an organization Y that does funding. Then you read the prospective, you go to their website or, find out more about them. Are they open check that they say, okay, here's the money, go do the research? Or do they give you money and it comes with terms and conditions which they've listed, like we'll only fund people in this age group, or we'll only fund ladies, or we'll only fund beginning investigators, or most recently we saw one where they were only funding people who had done a PhD and were in their first 2 years post-PhD. So even if you had a PhD, you had to meet the second requirement, which was being 2 years out of your PhD training. So read the information that the prospective funding body has, because then you don't spend a lot of time preparing this beautiful grant application and then you are disqualified on a minor technical detail. And then put here, read the RFA. So that is the request for application, or in some places they'll have what is termed an LOI, or letter of intent, or an expression of interest. So you read all of these details. I usually have them there, and I'll show you some examples when you go along. They detail exactly what they want, how much money there is, what budget is allowed, what is the application process. So read those things and then highlight. The last lecture I gave here, we were preparing a submission checklist for authors. When you read these RFAs, you can prepare a similar checklist, but now for grant submission, so that you note what is really important for you. And then I've put there in bold special eligibility instructions. Does your institution qualify? Many times they say we'll be funding institutions in sub-Saharan Africa or LMICs, or they will say the funding body will only fund an application that has both a North partner from either the US, the UK, or another similar setup, plus a partner in the LMIC part of the world. So it has to be a dual application, even if the lead applicant is from an LMIC country. So you need to read those small print about, do you qualify from the beginning? As I mentioned, is there an age requirement? Some grants are specifically looking for early career trainees. So they will say has to be within 5 years of graduation, or I've even seen one where they said they will only fund applicants up to the age of 35, and beyond that, they are no longer eligible. And then is there a publication requirement? So they say if you get these funds, you carry out your study, must you publish either in a journal they've specified, or will they need you to publish anywhere as long as it's a peer-reviewed journal? So these are really important, because then as you begin to ask for the money, you need to ask with the end in mind. So as I said, review the RFA. This is an example from the National Institutes of Health. This was a K01 study. For our purposes today, we will not go into the differences between the different study types, grants types, but in the US system, K awards are usually career development awards. And so you can see here, it's a research scientist development award, research and training, and the title is International Research Scientist. So you know just from clicking on this that they will be looking at applicants from all over the world. It's open, but they've also said here independent clinical trial required. So you have to meet both requirements. So you have to be a scientist from an international setup, but your application must have an independent clinical trial. And then you can see here which organizations are eligible to give the funding, and then the main sponsor of the grant. And then at the bottom, they'll tell you first time, second time, this is a reissue, meaning that it has been there before and they're re-advertising, or it is a reissue part of an existing series of grants that will be funded. So in a nutshell, in this first page, you can quickly tell what the funder is looking for and what you as the applicant will need to be able to get the grant. Again, most of these grants usually have somewhere, they have either a click or an email or a phone number. And as I learned from one of my mentors early on, he would simply write down the number and actually call them. And I remember one time we made a call to the lady who was receiving the applicants, and we asked her all these questions. Can we apply? Is our institution eligible? How much funds will you give us? Will we get it right away? What happens do we need to have a special, like in the US, you need to have an account in the system, grants.gov. You need to have, so they have some specific requirements for US applicants, which they would want for other parts of the world. So if you don't have that, you need to get an organization that can sponsor you. Do you need to have responsible conduct for research certificates? So this means that you have been prepared for training, and this is what you're going to use for your actual grant application. And then review the prior grants call. This is actually a good way of doing this. And what usually happens is you look at other grants that have been issued, what was in that grants call, what people submitted. And the next point is you can actually review prior successful grant applications, either on request. So if you call or contact them and say, I know you funded study X on this, could you send me what was funded? There's a place where they publish all of the successful grants, and you can review that. It's open information. If that's not available, you can actually look at who won the grant and either find their contact or search if you know them through the networks and talk to them. And actually, one of the ways we've done this in the past is to have a Zoom or Teams or Google Meet call with the prior applicant and ask them, so for this grant, what did they ask for? What did you submit? What was your plan? because then you can actually begin to prepare your own application to have a better chance of success. And then lastly, review the grant selection criteria. So as they'll be choosing, what are they looking for, and do I meet those criteria for selection? Now, I was going to ask if anyone knows what an elevator pitch is at this point in time. Actually, maybe I should ask it for 1 minute in the participants. Does anybody know what an elevator pitch is? You can put up your hand or put it in the chat. I'll put 30 seconds maximum. If no one responds, then we can move on. Anyone know? Aha, no takers. So imagine that you are going, oh, there's something in the chat. Let me see. So Chukumeka says a short sales pitch. Excellent. Juliet says brief, concise summary of your value proposition. Very good. So you guys actually know what this is. So I was going to say, imagine you have gone for a conference in your home country, or let's say American College of Surgeons, and you're in this conference room, and it is on 5th floor. And so you know that one of the attendees is a director from one of the funding organizations. Let's say for this sake, WHO, use it as an example. And so you walk into the elevator or lift, and the director of this organization that is funding also walks in and says, hi, I'm so and so. Oh, nice to meet you. By the way, where are you from? And then you say, I'm from Kenya, and I'm coming here to attend the meeting, and I'm potentially looking to get some funds. Then he says, tell me about your project. And so you are on the bottom. This is ground floor. So you know you have until 5th floor to tell this gentleman everything about your study and what you're looking for and the funds that you're asking for. That is what we call an elevator pitch. So in the time that it takes for that lift to go from ground floor to 5th floor, or from ground floor to 18th floor, you have 2 minutes or 3 minutes to tell this person what your study is about. And so one of the things that we learned how to practice much, much earlier on was how to do an elevator pitch. Remember that the funding bodies are looking for good researchers. So as you tell them about your study, you actually tell them, I have done, so you say, so and so, I've done prior research, it was on this, and we found ABCD, and because of that, we have now decided to explore how can we do early detection for this particular cancer, and because of that, I've already developed a study, and I want to actually look for funds to be able to carry out this particular thing, looking at the genomics, or looking at age, or looking at, so you see, you paint the picture, and you say, my budget is only 25,000 or 3,000. And if I had this, it would cover everything. I already have some money to be able to support this. And then you get to 5th floor and the lift opens. And this gentleman will go to that review room and will remember, in the lift, I met so-and-so who was talking about their project that they wanted to get funded. So one of the things that you need to, I always say it's good to practice, is what we call these elevator pitches. So sell your idea. Tell yourself, if I had all the money that I needed to fund this project, what would I ask for? Because then it refines your ask. If you only have 2 minutes to talk about the funding that you need, you don't have time to say, oh, but in Kenya, we need to have hospitals that can do the endoscopy. You simply narrow in and say, my idea is to go out there and to look for patients who we can actually look for the early lesion for this esophageal problem that you're having. Because if they agree, then later on they'll ask you, what is your research environment? Then you'll say, oh yeah, our hospitals need endoscopy equipment. And so because of that, I need to be able to do a good endoscopy. And so I will need to buy ABCD and provide ABCD. You see, now you can expand. But when you practice this often, many times, it allows you to now be able to be very focused and concise in what you're asking for. Then always remember, from the funding organization's perspective, they're asking this question: why should they give you some money to do your project? So you flip, and I'll show you in some of the examples down the road. that you can have an idea and you decide the funder wants people. Actually, I'll say it here, maybe you'll see it later on. So I was looking at a grant application that wanted a project that was done by people who are in a rural setup. And so what we did is came together with an idea, and it was to train in resource limited settings. So all of the training was carried out in trainees and faculty who are working in hospitals that are outside the major cities. So in as much as the idea could be executed in a standard hospital, simply because we set it up to be done in a rural facility, then it met the funders' criteria. And so from the funders' point of view, they say this meets what we are looking for. So if it's a grant that is looking at women who are having issues with what do you call this, contraception, or vaccines, then you have to tailor your grant to that. If the grant is looking for male patients with prostate cancer, then you cannot be asking, and your cohort has ladies, because they'll say you are not meeting what they want from the beginning. So you have the ideas, they have the money. How do you meet in the middle? And you have to somehow, I always say, it's almost like doing an interview application for a job interview. So they are asking, we have the funds and we're looking for a project that is really going to meet what we are looking for. And you have the idea. And sometimes you can tweak your idea so that the funder looks at it and says, oh yeah, this is actually tailored to what we want to achieve in this region. Deadlines and time zones, very important. What is the due date? So you will say 30th of October, 2025, okay? Is there a separate due date for the letter of intent? So you will read there and you will say full application needed December 31, but letter of intent or expression of intent due October 30th. Now, if you don't pay attention to the smaller due date and just focus on the main due date, they'll say, oh, but you never submitted an expression of interest. In fact, now to avoid this, many of the grants have you submit an expression, then they shortlist, and then they now ask you to submit a main application for funding. So you send them a more detailed document. As I learned from experience, if it says CST versus EAT, there's a big difference. So this is Central Standard Time. So that means if the funder is from the US, they will say midnight, 30th October, Central Standard Time. Versus if it was midnight, 30th October, East African Time, because this means if the deadline is in CST and I'm applying in Kenya, usually by the time it gets to midnight here, you have 7 to 8 more hours to submit because the timestamp is based on the American timestamp. Now, if we are sending a grant application in Africa, we often say midnight East African Time or midnight Central African Time. So if you are applying from the US, even though you are applying for an African grant, and in the US it is 12 midnight in Chicago, in Kenya we already passed 12 midnight. So you've missed the deadline. So it's really important that you look at these minor details. The second minor detail I will add is order of dates. So in Africa, many parts of Africa, actually I use Kenya, we are British. So we say 9th October 2022, which is 09/10/2025. But in the US, they would say 9th of October would be written 10/09. And so if you read it and you have based here often, you would think, oh, the deadline was in September, 10th of September, whereas they meant 9th of October. So you can miss out on things because of notation and how it was written. So it's really important to really look at the deadlines and the time zones. I will highlight this because many people have lost on technicalities because of not paying attention to these little differences in time zones and deadlines. And then the other thing is due by, sometimes they'll say close of business on a specific date, or they will even say due by such and such a time on the email stamp, because then it says, even if I sent it at midnight from my server, it comes with a timestamp on that email. But now most people actually use a standard notation. So it's either going to be midnight of East African Central Standard Time, or they'll tell you. So it's very specific, so there's no confusion. Then let's move on to the next thing. So now you're ready to submit your proposal. How do you get the best out of the application that you're putting in? So one, tailor your application. So by this, I mean, like my personal background is in endoscopy, esophagus, colon. So I would not be doing an application on an orthopedics grant if I was the primary applicant, because that is not my strength. I will be doing myself a disservice. The best is to get an orthopedic surgeon and say, hey, I've seen this grant. I can be part of your technical team. Could we make something that you can apply for and get the funds, and then we work together? And that actually segues to my next point, which is putting together a team. And usually the team has a mix. It's good to have an experienced person on your team. So somebody who's done grants works before. You can have somebody who's done prior research before. You can also have somebody who's had other grants, because then you can 0.3 leverage on what they have. And then as you put together the team, you also factor in, is this your area of expertise? Like I mentioned a few minutes ago, that if I'm applying for an endoscopy grant, that makes sense for me. If I'm applying for an education grant, it would make sense for me. But if I'm applying for a grant in implementation science, probably look for Dr. Samba, because that's his thing. If I was doing systematic reviews, look for Dr. Vincent. So you see, you can leverage on the different people that you have in your team to make this team that will be successful. I will give you a sneak peek, because I've sat on some grants review boards. Who you have on your team actually impacts your score, the final score that you get when they rank, because it's always competitive. They look and say, Mochiro had the following people on their team. This gentleman has 50 years of experience or 20 years of experience in this field, so he's really, really good and has done the following grants have been published. So we know if we give them money, they are likely to complete this project. Now, so remember, as I moved into the grants review process, it will be reviewed by both experts and non-experts. What does that mean? Your language should be technical enough for the experts to follow, and non-technical enough for the non-experts to be able to understand what you're saying. So it can be really detailed and say, we will do the genomics of this and study this particular thing, but you put it in such a way that the non-experts can follow the gist of what you are trying to say and actually can say, oh yeah, this is a sound proposal. Whereas the experts in that review team will be looking at the rigor. So they look at the technical merit, who you have on your team, what lab you're using, what methodology. But the other team members will look at, the outcomes, the flow, and they always put together these teams that have a mix, because then it gives a balance to how they review the process. Your summary page or abstract should actually summarize your entire proposal, highlighting what you want to achieve, the key things, what you've done in the past, what you are intending to get from your study, and what areas that you hope to fill the gaps. And then finally, ask for help to improve your proposal. Send it around to your team, of course, confidentially. In fact, one of the things I say is you can have agreements with people that you trust and say, I will send you this for you to review, on condition that you do not share it out. Because we know some people have had their ideas copied and actually submitted for the very same grant proposal by people who they were asking for help. So I say this, you take it with a pinch of salt, that you really need to have a trustworthy team that you can talk to about your idea. If there are any things like patents that will come out of your project, then those patent registrations and things, you can work on them so that you have them. Because if there's an issue, somebody else doesn't claim that they were the first when you are patenting something. So that when you get your project done, that the appropriate credit is given. And then the other thing is, as you look at getting the best out of your proposal, do you have a good idea on which to base your work? So are you building on work that has already been done? You could start from scratch, but usually for that, it's novel research. So you say in your institution, you discover that we can do procedure X using a certain technique that no one else in the world has done. Then you would your baseline would be what everyone else has done and what you are proposing and how different it is, because then they can see the actual difference. And then does your proposal clearly explain what the work will be done? Because this is what will be used to score. Is there evidence that the proposers know about relevant papers published in the same field? Do you have a good track record of doing research and of publishing it? And actually some funding bodies make you attach, what do you call it, a grant's publication history as part of your application. Very important, what are the implications for policy and practice? Because then they see the practicality, and if they have to do a split decision between one applicant and another, then they can decide to look at the project that actually impacts care. And then does your proposal address a well-formulated problem? Is this problem important? Do you need special funding or additional funding? Solve it quickly. And does the research team have their own funds that they can leverage? And then for methodology, please describe in detail and actually make sure that your methodology relates to the research question that you're asking. In fact, as we talked about when you're preparing a manuscript for publication, even as you prepare a grant proposal, the question that you're trying to address is always important, because the grant funding is actually funding a research question that you have. Is there sufficient rigor to produce adequate answers? And can this process be replicated by someone else someday in the future? Because then that addresses the question of real-world application. And then are the timelines realistic? You were saying we will do the project in 2 months and you're trying to enroll 500 subjects. Of course, that's not possible. Or are you saying we'll do the project over 3 years and you're only going to interview 10 people? They will say you're asking for more money than you need. And so both of those will not be funded. So you have to balance the timelines with the sample size, with the research question, and make sure that it is realistic. And then for ethical issues, applications, IRB approvals, have this been addressed? Or is there a plan to address them? Because sometimes you'll say, we want to apply for ethics, we will submit, but we also need funding because of the cost of submitting this for a randomized controlled trial. And so once we get the funding, we will submit in a certain timeline and also give you a copy of the application. If you already have ethical approval, this is the best, because then it makes it easier. They know that once they fund you, you probably will hit the ground running. Then now you are looking at your proposal is coming together. You have a question, you have the methodology, you have a research team. Then you need to put there how you'll measure the success. So these are usually outcomes, outputs. Will you publish papers? Will you list people trained? Will you list counties covered? Will you list number of patients reached? So all of those measures of success need to be put as part of your application. And then very importantly, distinguish between monitoring and evaluation. So monitoring is part of the project management. This is continuous. Like you will check how much supplies we have. Is the budget adequate? Do we need an extension? That's monitoring. And then evaluation is formal assessment of the outcomes of the project when you are done. At the very end or at the midpoint, we'll evaluate our project and see what we've done. We'll look at the funds that we have and what we've been able to leverage. Or in some cases, which has happened, that one grant was given and in the process of carrying out their project, they were actually able to get more funding from other things, and that shows a multiplying effect. And then lastly, how will dissemination be done of your findings? And is there a budget for this? So you need to plan for this, because some journals require you to pay. You might have to travel to regional meetings, national meetings, or you might want to involve the media or the press. All of these things, whatever you want to do, you need to show that there's a dissemination plan and that your budget factors in that you will be able to do this. So some pitfalls to think about. The first one is straightforward. The application, poor grammar, it does not flow, spelling errors, typos. this, if they are looking, if it's very stiff competition, it might end up being the tiebreaker. The other one is when you bite more than you can chew. So proposals are attempting to do too much and for the time scale that they have. Another one is you have a really good idea, it's new, but you don't explain how you're going to do it. And because it's new, there's always some hesitation that they are funding something that may end up not being proven. And so if you're doing a new idea, then you have to be really, really detailed in your technical details, because then they can see clearly what you want to do. Proposers are unaware that there is other related research that has been done or is currently ongoing, because then there is no novelty. And so this, of course, means the grant application will not score strongly. And then the one I started with, having a good research question. So if it's not clear what the question is being addressed by this proposal, usually it will be scored low and then will not be funded. So I say here it's the little things, and this points towards, so when you are looking at your budget, what are the small things that the grant funder has put there? So they will say we will only allow 15% to go towards overheads, or 5% to go towards administrative costs, or the PI budget cannot be more than 7.5%. Or we will allow you to buy a laptop, equipment, or we will give you the money, but you may not buy a laptop or any supplies. Or they might say, we'll give you the funds, but you may not use it to pay for training, like an MPH or a PhD. So those things are really important, because if you put them in and there were things that were excluded, your project may be not funded. Sometimes they might consider it and say, we will fund you, but the amount you asked for training here, we are going to remove that because this grant will not cover that amount. And then include an itemized budget, setting out the cost every year that the grant life will be on. And if your grant funding is contingent of you meeting a certain point, then you show also how your budget will factor in getting to that point and then asking for more money. Then cost justification for each item should be given, because then it's clear why the money is being asked for. So some practical tips. We've gone through the overall process. So write out the idea in your own words. So you say, I want to put a grant proposal to train surgeons in trauma. So you write the idea in your own words and see how it sounds to you. Like, does this idea make sense? Highlight the objectives that you want to achieve. List what are your deliverables. So what do I want to get out of this? And then, do you have yourself the bandwidth to be able to get this money and do the project? So some people ask for money, but they are too busy that they get the grant but cannot actually cover the material or submit, they don't meet the deadlines. And so they end up failing, not because it was a bad idea, but because they were just busy. And if that is the case, what mechanisms have you put in place to ensure that you will have success? Don't be afraid to rewrite, change direction a little bit. If somebody gives you input, you might have to do that. And importantly, seek out courses on grantsmanship. So actually, we have a number of groups that do this. EOTIC has had a number of courses on this. The NIH has done some online ones. The NIHR, that's the UK National Institutes of Health and Research. So there are different groups that do courses on how to write a good grant. And there you get to listen to, and this is a good example of a course on grantsmanship, because we are doing a 1 hour talk on this. But there are some places where they actually have a 2-day course, and you go in there and they make you write an actual proposal, which is scored, and you get to participate in reviewing other people's proposals. So then you see the process and what they're asking for, because then it opens your mind to what you should put in your own application. So as we come towards the end, we'll switch to some practical discussions. There's, I don't know how you want to put it. Some people say money begets money, but you cannot ask for the $1 million grant without showing that you can take care of the smaller grants. So usually the best advice I would say is start small. So COSEXA has a number of small grants, $3,000, $1,000, $1,500, $500. Those little amounts add up to big grants. And personally, I got quite a number of these small grants. Many of the bodies issue these out every year. WISA has a grant for the ladies that they give out. SSK this year will be giving out some grants for research to its members. So these small grants acts as catalysts to big grants. And then the next category I have there are these what you call beginning career grants, and there are various types. I'll show you some examples later on, but these are tailored towards new grants career people. So you've never applied for a grant, or you've applied for a small one, and now you're looking for a slightly bigger one. So they're usually in the range of $10,000 to $25,000, or 1 million Kenya shillings to 2.5 million Kenya shillings. They allow you to do a fairly larger project with a fairly large amount of money, and usually the period is 1 to 2 years or 3 years. You can also have seed grants. So these are specifically designed to allow you to start. Then once you've started, you can now launch your own career. And as you saw, the next level is the career development grants. And then you have the larger scientific-based grants, like the R1 grants in the US, where you're given your own lab, you have your own team, and so you get a large grant, say $1 million, and you can now decide this lab will do this and this, and I find one PI to do this, another PI to do this. But you work your way up the chain, and usually as you go further along, they become collaborative. So it's not just one person applying, it's a team that is applying for the grant, and they are actually working on many times multi-site grants or randomized clinical trials. These are really expensive to run if you're introducing new technology, and many times are supported even by pharma or industry. I put this slide here. I have a good mentorship team. And actually, these individuals in my own journey have been in different spheres. On the left there is Russ White, who's at Tenwek, was the head of surgery. Now he's the head of cardiothoracic surgery. And we did many projects together. Actually, the first project that I had him and the gentleman over here, that's Sandy Dorsey from the National Cancer Institute in the US. And he'd been doing work for over 30 years, and he'd been practicing for a similar amount of time in surgery. He's in pathology. But the project we were working on was in esophagus cancer. And then these two gentlemen, Tapley and Abebe, professors of surgery, and both are surgical educators. And so the team that you work with helps you to grow your own journey, because they can look and say, like Sandy would ask me many times, what do you want to get out of this? If it's this pathway, then you need to build a team that has the people that you want to get you to that destination. So I'm going to really emphasize that as you start your grants journey and your research journey, you need to have a good mentorship team that can support you. And eventually, as you move along, you yourself will have other people that you mentor and help on this journey. So where do you look for the grants? We've talked about how to write, the elements of a grants application. So where do we look for some of this money? I gave you some of the examples. It depends on the organization or specialty. So if you're an orthopedic surgeon, you can probably go to AO Alliance. There used to be a group called the COSEXA Orthopedic Oxford Link. They used to give a lot of good money for trauma. If you're in the cancer space or public health, the Fogarty Institute does a lot of funding. They have an Institute of Global Health. All of these offer grants. Aortic, African Organization for Research and Training in Cancer, they also do funding specifically in cancer work. Same with ESMO. The UK National Institutes of Health and Research, they also you can leverage. I'm working at a government facility. You talk to your, local leadership and say, as an institution, we will partner with the government to get a grant to do a specific thing that is administered through the government, but to your facility to do the research program or training program. So you can see, you can actually be creative about how you leverage the connections that you have. So some examples, if you go to the IOTIC website, they have this beginning investigator grant. It's usually $50,000. And literally you can leverage everything you do and put it here. So even if you are let me say what, assuming you are a general surgeon and you have a project that you want to run and you can build in cancer work into your project, then you can apply for this. But as the name says, this grant is actually geared towards identifying people who are interested in doing research as a pathway, and they fund that because the idea is to create programs that will run longitudinally. Fogarty International Center, they fund pretty much anything. And you can see here, because of the changes in the climate, they've added a statement here. You can see here it says, important reminder, any grants submitted by foreign institutions with a foreign component must include a foreign justification. This is a reflection of the current realities in the US ecosystem, where there were some changes in how they were looking at funding research, both internally and externally. So we'll move on to the last part of my talk, and that is, how do you practically do this? So you've submitted your grant. The last lecture I gave, I talked about research papers being rejected. I'll now talk to you about the rejection of grants. You can have a desk rejection where you submit and they simply tell you, sorry, we are looking for a specific group of people. You do not meet the criteria. You can be rejected at the initial triage. So you make it to the first group and then they say, oh yes, we had considered you, but now we've reviewed. And out of the 200, we chose 20. And so we were unable to consider your study because of the following reasons, scientific rigor or merit or team or your own personal journey. You are not ready. You're not at the stage where you should be applying for this level of grant. Maybe you should consider a lower level grant. And then there's a competitive stage. So, and these are the more painful ones, in my own opinion, where you get to the very last stage. So they wanted 3 and they shortlisted 20. They narrowed it down to 10. You went for interviews, they asked you many questions, and then they choose 3. And so they send you usually an email saying, thank you for application. Here is your grants report. They actually send you a very detailed report that you scored on outputs or deliverables. This is what you scored on methodology. This is what you scored on impact. This is what you scored on originality. This is what you scored. And the rest of your co-applicants, this is what they scored. And therefore, because of that, we were not able to give you the funding. But you are invited to resubmit. And I usually say at this point, read the comments and ask yourself, what can I improve? Is it something personal? Can I go and do additional courses? Can I publish a few more papers so that next time I'll have a better publication history? Can I add a team member to my team, get an expert in something that they can now support your application? So then you can change for the next cycle something about your application. So it's really important that you read those comments that you get, and then you tailor your next application based on that. And actually, as I said in the last talk, failure is not a bad thing because you can learn from it. And then you can be able to move to the next step. So you get the email saying, congratulations, you have been given 10,000 US dollars. It will begin effective November 1. What happens? So you need to start thinking about funds management. The practicality of this means if you are in a hospital that is public, or is private. Depending on your setup, you need to ask yourself, how will the money get to you? And I will spend some time here. This is really important. You have to meet with your team before the money comes. You call the hospital, have a meeting, and say, I have been given this money. It's $10,000. It is only to be used for research. How can we set up an oversight team? And that's what I've put here, oversight and accountability. And so they say, okay, fine, the money will be received. It will go to our hospital account. The chief accountant, the med soup, head of research will be the signatories, including yourself, so that there is no way money can be moved without it being signed off. You create a pathway for this to happen if it is not already there. Most hospitals now have a research unit with a grants management team that do this for you. But many times you might be setting this up, and so you have to think about these things. You have to keep up with the reporting. Sometimes some of the requirements for getting the next installment is that you report on what you've done, or some of the requirements for you to be considered eligible for future funding is that you reported on the funds that you got. So it's really important that you meet the reporting requirements. And then actually get the project done. So you have the money, buy the equipment, supplies, if you said you're going to do some training, do it. So begin getting the project done. Because remember, if it's a 2-year grant, at the end of year 1, there'll be a meeting to review what you've done. And usually they'll ask you, what progress have you made? And what have you achieved so far? What are the challenges? And you're able to give this. But you need to get the project done. So you actually have to do the research you said you would do. I put here this point. I have unused funds. What next? If you asked for $10,000 and you discover by the end of the project you have $5,000 remaining, it means 2 things. Either you did not actually do what you said you would do, or maybe the budget changed and you're able to save some money. The general rule is most funders will make you return the money if you don't use it for your grant. And so one of the things that I always say is you need to keep track of the funds. If you discover that you have funds from your project because of operational efficiencies, so you are able to, you had said you'd go out to community X and you discover that going there, you're able to save money either because they had a system or for whatever reason, then you can look at, are there ways that the grants team will allow you to use those funds within your grant in such a way that it will still meet their requirements. So you can tell them, we have $3,000 of unused funds. However, we are going to run a research training course that was not originally part of our plan, but we would like to do it. And you submit this to them in advance so that they know. Because if you do it without telling them, they will say you did not use the money for what it was used. So in general, try to use the funds that you have asked for what you said you would do for, and actually use them for that, so that you don't have these unused funds business. Painfully, remember, we had to send back around 4,000 US dollars many, many years ago, because somehow by the end of the reporting period, we discovered that those funds were not used. And they said, well, you had said you'd use them and you didn't use them, so please send it back. And we had to send back the money. And then meet all grant requirements that you had said you would meet and they had put for you. And then lastly, always acknowledge the grant in publications. There's a standard way they do this. They say this project was funded by grants by this organization. Grant number was this, amount was this. We do this and this, so that it's it's searchable and the funders will be happy that you are acknowledging them. So my last few minutes, I will show you some examples from my own research life. Those of you who attended the manuscript talk, I talked to you about this. This was my first large funded study. It was looking at dysplasia in patients, symptomatic residents in Bomet County, which was a high area for esophageal cancer. We submitted this proposal. That is what we wanted to do. And once we got the money, we were able to set up the team. As you can see here, the pathology team in Nairobi. We set up the endoscopy team at the hospital. We got somebody to help us with statistics. We had research personnel, and then we actually had to go through the process of setting up this project, from scratch. We learned the techniques. You can see this picture here is actually demonstrating this was an orientation technique for the specimen. So all of the different things that needed to happen, shipping the specimens from Tenek Hospital to the lab at University of Nairobi with Prof. Gidanga, and then getting the results back. And then eventually we were able to publish this paper. This is what we found. And as I said in the last talk, initially it was rejected, but we got it published in this journal. So that was the entire cycle. We got the money, we were able to submit the proposal and get it funded. Now, for this particular grant, the initial applications for this grant was actually a wait. They put me on the waiting list, and I had to wait for some time before they actually gave us the money to do the project. And the wait period was actually, I remember, almost 6 to 9 months. So imagine 9 months you're waiting and you're asking yourself, will they actually give you the funds to do the study? And eventually when the funds came, then we had a very short period to get the study done and get it completed, which we were able to do successfully. What usually happens when you get one grant, it will give birth to another grant. So when we published our findings, we began asking ourselves new questions. And so we designed a new second study that was done by my colleague, Dr. Lando. And this study was also funded, $53,000 over a 2-year period. And it was looking at another cohort of patients that we had found in our first, we had a hypothesis from the first study. And here we were asking what happens if we do the same study, but now looking at asymptomatic first-degree relatives of patients who are coming in for endoscopy in our unit. So we were able to get this funded again, went through the process, reporting for the grant, publishing of the paper, and that was actually published. And you can see here, the team actually remained pretty much the same from the first project to the second one. The new entrants were now Lando because this was his project, and Paul Albert, who joined the team, but the rest of the team remained the same. I put this here to show you can get funding for, I call them random things. This study, we were looking at using the jerrycan pain scale to assess pain. And it was a small grant funded by COSEXA. And so we got the funds, we did this study in the hospital, and we were able to get this study funded. And then the next grant that got funded was this one from the UK, and it was looking at training for surgeons. And again, just to show you that you can pivot ideas and apply for funds from different funding organizations, and they can be able to fund your project. Now, over time, as we started doing research, we began asking the questions, how do we make the funding for our research sustainable? So another way that we're able to do this, and I put this up here to show you research funding can take different avenues. We formed a consortium, which is called the African Esophageal Cancer Consortium. And after around 10 or so years, 5 or so years, we began asking, is there ways to raise for funds to be able to do not just research, but clinical care? And because of that, we actually set up a foundation. So now we have the AFREC Consortium and the AFREC Foundation. And this was a launch during one of the meetings in the US. And now we were able to set up a team with board members, some of whom you see here. And the last grant that we got for this was for training, and it was around $200,000, which was able to fund both training and research across the region in 6 countries. And so you can see you can move from small grants to larger grants. And the last grant that I'll show you is this one, which I'm a PI. So we have two co-applicants, myself and Florian. And this grant is looking at esophageal cancer and has multiple pillars for clinical care training across the region. So this grant is actually focused on the countries where we have high prevalence of esophageal cancer, and is the last grant that we are in year 2 of 3 of administering this grant. So as I finish, and maybe we can take a few questions, is enjoy the journey of, for myself, I've put these slides to show you. This was the first project that I did. And you've seen the grants that we've been able to get over time. Some of the side effects of my journey in research and in grants has been, like now what we're doing with COSEXA, with the journal in Kenya, with the Annals of African Surgery. I review for all of these different journals globally, and also write. And so, now when I look back at this journey in research and grantsmanship, you realize that a lot can change over time, and we keep on growing, but it's important that we don't forget where we started and how we can be able to impact others. And that's my last point. And that was my reflections on this whole idea of mentorship in clinical care and research, and how we can ensure that the next generation of researchers and surgeons can be able to help each other. And so for all of you, that's the elephant in the room. How can we help each other grow, and how can we improve clinical care and training and outcomes on our continent, and actually put out really good quality manuscripts that everyone can reference, not just here but across the world. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy this series of lectures, both as participants and as presenters. Thank you.